Hey guys, welcome to this week's AECVC, my weekly view showing you behind my own scenes, as well as how I prepared my mind the last week. So the first thing I posted about, and you can find the link here, is about compounding optionality. And I'm talking about and sharing my view of how founders in construction tech and AEC tech don't necessarily need to have the grandest of all possible visions for their company in 10 years from now, in order to start the company, in order to raise capital, in order to hire recruits, etc. But instead, the formula that I like and that I have a taste for is you build a business that is a real business today. And in doing that, you unearth more and more optionality with your customers, with your team, left and right. And that optionality, if it's compounding for you over time, you can still end up in a very grand vision place, but you don't have to imagine what that looks like. So business plus compounding optionality plus non-obvious insight is another thing that I have a taste for. If you have these things in your formula, you don't need to tell a narrative of a grand vision. And that's good, because a grand vision 10 years out in today's extremely volatile and fast-paced world anyway has so many assumptions of scenarios around you baked in that it will eventually most likely crumble under its assumptions. So go for business, optionality, compounding, and that non-obvious insight. And I think you have a great way to start your company in ConstruTech, in AEC tech. And by the way, this is especially relevant for ConstruTech and AEC tech because customers will give you more optionality if you deliver outcomes and value for them. If you actually help them do business, if they taste your barn smell, if they see your track record, you're reliable in giving them the outcomes and value that they want, they will come back to you and not to your peer. And that's part of the whole optionality that you can have compound for you without necessarily knowing today what that looks like in year 5. So that's a formula that I can only recommend. I have a taste for that. Secondly, I spoke in the link here about how maddened I am in a funny way when B2C marketplace investors talk to our best B2C, B2B marketplaces in construction around the globe. They tend to project the B2C marketplace on these companies, but it actually doesn't apply in many ways. Let me share two things in two ways how it doesn't apply. The first one is supply liquidity. So the traditional B2C marketplace playbook with which these companies have found success is, hey, build a lot of supply liquidity. With that liquidity, you have optionality, you can build density around geographies, and so on and so forth. And that's how you can drive prices down, you can make sure that the transactions are being done, etc. Well, that makes sense. If you have low AOVs, you have, average order values, AOVs, when you have a high number of transactions, the transactions are hyper standardizable, like in a mobility marketplace for urban mobility, for example. But the B2B marketplaces in construction, they have high average order values. They are not necessarily standardizable in terms of transactions all the time. Sometimes you need to inject some engineering advice into the context of the conversation with the customer. And the risk of failing on a transaction is extremely high for your customer. So on the supplier side, there's an additional ingredient. These suppliers, they don't have a high utilization all the time. Some of them actually become your suppliers because they don't have a high utilization and they want you and they want to work for you in order to help them guarantee a higher utilization, which is the opposite of supply liquidity. So that's one of the things that as a B2B marketplace in construction is actually counterintuitive to the playbook that worked in B2C, right? So click the article, I'm sharing the other maddening part there. And then finally, I spoke about leapfrogging software. So that's a conversation we've had in Fundamental for a while now. Shub and I spoke about it at length in Practical Nerds, see the link. But the thesis that we're formulating, beginning to formulate really, based on the following observations. So when you go into general contractors in the United States, the US has been successful and pioneering and adopting construction-related software for 15 years. They're ahead in terms of the adoption curve, far ahead of many other countries. But that has created a situation where these GCs, in anecdotal instances, have 500 to 1,000 different softwares within the company in approach. And so that is not necessarily connected. In fact, it's very rarely connected. Whereas if you look into Europe, Europe has been made fun of every now and then about, the GCs are maybe less software adoptive. which in many cases might be true, exceptions are there, but that has created also an industry or a sector in Europe where the GCs have only anecdotally 50 to 100 softwares. So that's almost an order of magnitude, or exactly an order of magnitude, in some cases behind the US adoption curve. Now, what that creates is a leapfrogging opportunity though, because if you have less technical debt and you have time dilation, meaning you can see a window into your own future by observing what a market looks like when they are 15 years ahead of you in terms of adoption, you all of a sudden have an opportunity to actually skip these additional 450 or 950 softwares to adopt, and you can immediately jump to the stage where you don't need them. Or maybe you prioritize differently. And I think one of these leapfrogging opportunities where Europe could now spearhead the next phase, if it plays its cards right, is data infrastructure, to actually solve the connectivity issues and the data ontology issues between the different softwares to let the data flow properly and to prepare it properly for AI. So here, a GC that has adopted a ton of software is in a worse state than a GC that has adopted less software. That creates an interesting leapfrogging opportunity. And for founders, you can use these kinds of customers if you're building data infrastructure to help these companies prepare for AI better than adopting more and more and more point solutions. So these are three topics. You can find the links in the article below. Thanks for listening and see you again next week. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Make sure that you subscribe under acvc.com, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. See you next time.